come to pay him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
It's a special pleasure today, at least for those of us who are liturgy geeks, to actually celebrate the Feast of Epiphany on a Sunday. To be able to focus on this celebration instead of dividing the focus with other church observations or needing to choose among two important days. For those traditions like ours that observe the 12 days of Christmas, from Christmas Day to Epiphany, it's a gracious way to bring the season to a close in a world where it's more likely that Christmas trees have been thrown to the curb on December 26th, and decorations that have been up since Thanksgiving are packed away again in the attic. But here today, we can bring those magi to the altar to join the Holy Family and present their precious gifts. And we can ponder Matthew's story of these strangers who made such a long, perilous journey to see for themselves this unlikely phenomenon signified by a star in the sky. Now, the Feast of the Epiphany and its place, January 6th, on the liturgical calendar, are not particularly biblical. Yet it goes way back in Christian history and tradition to a time even before December 25th was established as Christmas Day. It's believed to have originated in Asia Minor and Egypt, the eastern part of the Roman Empire, as a celebration initially of both the birth and the baptism of Jesus. Through the years, it's been known by a number of different names: Feast of the Manifestation, Feast of Lights, Feast of the Appearing of Christ, Feast of the Three Kings, and the 12th Day, and likely others. In Western Christianity, it eventually came to commemorate the visit of the Magi, the manifestation to the Magi of this new thing that God had done. Celebration of the Epiphany is not tradition just for the sake of tradition. It's a way, I think, to emphasize that deeper meaning of the whole significance of the Incarnation. Rather than celebrating simply an anniversary of Christ's birth, we see the coming of God into our lives in human form, the ongoingness of God's presence in Jesus' life and ministry, even to his crucifixion and resurrection. It's also a story that shows us how outsiders were included in God's story. These Magi, Gentiles. Interesting, isn't it, that Matthew's gospel virtually begins with evidence that God's message is meant for all people, not just for the faithful, not just for the chosen of Israel. This is a story that cannot be isolated into a simple, charming tableau like a painting of the Nativity that we put on our Christmas cards. It's a story that is woven into our very identity as Christians, carrying with it not only the warm and fuzzy, tender joy of the mother and child, but the realities of the cold and the discomfort, the long journey of strangers following a star through unknown lands and uncertain paths toward an unexpected ending. Why would they do this? What did they find? The Magi, of course, had no GPS, no NASA to track their routes. They followed the ancient practice of studying the placement and the movement of stars in the sky. I expect that practice originated very early in the life of humanity, long before astrologers and philosophers like the Magi began to ascribe meaning to the skies. Meaning, like the significance of a new heavenly body never seen before. This extra brilliant star that we now call the Star of Bethlehem, that behaved in a way that drew them from their distant homeland to find what it signified, thought to be the birth of someone very important who would impact the whole world, most likely a king. It was unusual and seemingly important enough to do more than study the star in its course, but to take a long and arduous journey to find and honor this king in a different land, a different culture, a different religious faith. Along the way, the Magi sometimes needed additional help. Perhaps there were some cloudy nights where the star was not completely visible. Or perhaps they had developed some of their own notions about where they were going and came to doubt what the star was telling them. Bethlehem? That dusty little no-account place? Really? Wouldn't a king be more likely found in a place like Jerusalem, the place of the temple? Maybe that's why they took the detour that led them to Herod the Great, the king of the Jews, to Jerusalem instead of Bethlehem. Herod, of course, was very interested in their news and their questions, called on the Jewish priests and scribes to interpret the words of the prophets in Scripture. The Magi's dream, telling them not to comply with Herod's request to report on their findings, sent them home by a different way. And they probably never knew that their doubting of that star unwittingly set off Herod's fears and resulted in a very dark side of this otherwise happy story that is not included in today's lectionary, but comes in the very next verses. Herod's slaughter of all of the baby boys from 2 years old and under to assure that this one, who might pose a threat to his own rather shaky power and standing, would be eliminated. I've used the word manifestation more than once. That is the meaning of Epiphany, of course. A manifestation, a breaking in or a revealing that makes us see in a new way, transforms how we see. An aha moment, maybe, when something obscure suddenly becomes clear. And that is what these Magi, these Gentiles, experienced. Not what they were expecting. The Magi must have been surprised at what they found when the star came to rest. It did indeed end in Bethlehem. But there was no king, no palace, just a simple house with a simple peasant couple and a small child. Very ordinary. At that point, I wonder if they realized that they had a choice to make. Should they doubt the star? Should they assume that they'd been misled and head on home, taking their gold, their precious spices with them? Or should they set aside their doubts and their previous expectations, get their heads around this unusual ending, trust and recognize that they might not know all the answers just yet? There might be more to be revealed as they travel back home, or even after they got there, as they told their story and passed on the news, strange as it might have seemed. Well, there was something that caused them to kneel, to give their precious gifts, to ignore their orders to report back to Herod. They were able to drastically reorient their expectations and recognize that this indeed was where the star had led them. It was an epiphany so powerful as to overcome the preconceptions that they had brought, even to defy logic. What stars do we follow? Who do we trust when we question or doubt the epiphanies that confront our own lives? Or when the path seems to meander in unexpected directions or become harder than we think we're able to handle? In this world of ours, we're bombarded by stars. Stars of success, stars of material comfort or luxury, stars for some of fame and power or happiness. These stars speak loudly. In fact, they shout. If we follow them, we may achieve the promised rewards. And for some, that is just fine. For others, there are more questions. What next? Is this all there is? I have all of this, but I feel empty. Sometimes we receive some insight, some compelling sense of purpose or direction. We might struggle with a decision to change course, to risk something very new. We might come to terms with the choice and set off, probably with a mixture of confidence, excitement, and anxiety. Where do we go when the light of the guiding star dims a bit or leads us to a twisting path that stirs up those doubts? Who, what do we trust? The right stars, the right epiphanies, are about light, about revealing. It's a light that lies within us, the light of Christ that burns deep in our hearts and can drive away the darkness. It is this light that we must recognize and must nurture, just as we would tend the burning embers of a fire. And we must trust the light, even when the going gets rough, and especially when it takes you to unexpected places. And then, of course, we must spread that light. Every little ray. Our world so desperately needs light. Of course, sometimes we conclude a journey only to find ourselves right back home where we started. But that's okay. I've used this quote before, but I like it. The Reverend John Philip Newell, quoting from a poem of Mary Oliver. What can be wrong with that? He writes of such a moment, at such a quotation. Then Oliver says, I go back to my own house, my own life, which has now become brighter and simpler, somewhere I have never been before. Newell goes on to say, I think the wise men in returning home saw everything more brightly. The light they had found in a distant land turned out to be the light at the heart of their own land. But now they saw it as if for the first time. Shall we serve this light together, he asks? Shall we bow to it in one another and every nation? It is the light within all life. As the prophet Isaiah said to us, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. May your light so shine." Amen.